Hello. Oh, I'm getting some sunlight glare. Oh, that's alright, isn't it? That's fine. Sunlight's good. Unless it's not. How is that? Am I completely washed out? I'm gonna adjust the blinds slightly. There, maybe that'll do it. Let's see. It's a little better, or is it exactly the same? Who knows? You do, not me. Maybe if I just move slightly myself. Look at that pup. Don't look at me, look at the pup. Whoa. Whoa. Look at this guy. Hold him in my hands. He's so little. Little boy. Little puppy dog. Give him a little pet. Not too rough, though. Ha ha. No scratch on the head. Oh. Scratch his little noggin. Little scratches. Oh no, I dropped him. That's just the magic of perspective for you. Just a little. I don't know what I'm going on about. I'm a little tired today. How are you? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I startle? Is anybody other than Farm Mouse here? I don't think so. Just you and me, Farm Mouse. Sharkies may not be here for a little bit. I imagine Books, Brews, and Booze will... Oh no! Goodbye, puppy. I'll miss you. I imagine Books, Brews, and Booze will show up eventually, maybe. Unless they're busy tonight. I'm having some lemonade. I need to figure out how to have the chat get overlaid onto the actual video so that it's, I don't know, easier for people maybe to like, so it'll show up maybe on the YouTubes when I upload. Because I really haven't done any kind of technical modifying. Sharkies? You're at the park right now, and you still came here? Are the kids off playing? Does it help if I talk like this? Probably not so much. How's the birthday celebrations going? It's lovely weather for it. Bright and sunny out. Speaking of the park, I took the puppy to the park today. He had a lovely time running around the fields. There's a really big dog park sort of where we live right now. That's like two quite large fields sort of attached to each other by a little walkway that goes under, like there's a walking footpath that goes over a highway, and then it comes down between these two fields that are separated by that. And yeah, quite large fields. And so Puppy gets to do lots and lots of running around when we go there. And sometimes there's lots of other dogs there. Like sometimes there'll be big groups of dogs. But today there was just one other puppy that Bin had a brief hello with. You got ice cream. What kind of ice cream? Just vanilla? Or something elaborate. Nothing against vanilla, it's just, I meant like, you know, single flavor vanilla, or did you go for some kind of like Rocky Road or chocolate? Farmhouse had physio today. Espresso flake. Oh boy. Oh, oh. Farmhouse is giving me instructions. Navigate to your chat icon. Bottom chat section. Choose pop-out chat. Your chat will open a separate browser window. You'll need to copy its link. Okay. I can do that stuff probably. Pop-out chat. I've done that before. I just do it like that. Or maybe. Maybe I have to do it over here. Tiger Tail. When I was a kid, brief story time. When I was quite young, prior to grade 3, I lived in Abbotsford. During grade 3, my parents moved to Cultus Lake, and so, you know, that was a big change. But prior to that, we lived in Abbotsford. I went to Prince Charles Elementary. I lived on McKee Road. There's all my personal details out in the world, huh? That was probably a mistake. Now I could get doxxed. But my grandmother and I would take a bus into town, and there was an ice cream shop in town, and Tiger Tail was my favorite way back when. I haven't had Tiger Tail for a long time. I don't know that I would like it as much now, but I might. Okay, there's the pop-out chat. But yeah, back when I was a kid, Tiger Tail was my favorite. On the bottom left. The plus bottom button on sources or scenes? Probably scenes. Alright, I'm waiting for further instructions. Go to the game overlay option in the Streamlabs desktop. You know, I'm not sure. Am I using Stream? I'm actually just using OBS Studios. I have Stream Elements, and I think I just don't use it. Let's try under scenes. What if I do this? I'm sorry. I don't know. That was a mistake. I'm messing around with my elements here trying to get the chat overlay to show up on the video itself. And kind of mucked that up a little. All right, let's see. Oh, you didn't hear my tiger tail story. Game overlay, huh? I've got game capture. Display capture. Hmm. Let's try over here. Okay. That's not quite what I'm trying something here. Sorry. Slightly boring, probably. Now, see, these aren't doing quite what I'm looking for. The instructions you're looking are having me... Oh, hey, Lily's here. Hi, Lily. I'm being kind of boring at the moment. I'm just trying to figure out how to add Twitch chat to the actual video stream. That wasn't quite it. That had the chat open up for me so that I could see it, but I don't think it allowed... I don't think it actually showed it. Because I'm trying to get it to show up like, you know, right here on the screen so that when I record these videos, people can see it there, and also like on YouTube or whatever. That's what I want to see. Hang on, I might have found it. Oh no, this is a whole widget. Maybe that's what I need. Maybe I should figure this out another time, rather than with everybody here watching me. So the Sharkies are kind of busy at a park right now. But Lily's here. Farmhouse is here. Maybe some others will show up in a bit. How's everybody's couple of days been since Wednesday? I have had less of a busy week. I did go to Kung Fu last night, where we actually practiced lion dance because we've got a lion dance coming up next Tuesday that I'm going to help out with. We're going to have 2 lions doing a performance. I'm not going to be under a lion this time. I'm actually going to help out with the music probably, and setting up and things like that. So I may end up on cymbals. Yeah, so that's fun. My school has a lot of different lions. For this performance, we're going to be doing some very sort of, I don't know, kind of edgy looking black and red ones. I've got a picture of one of them from the back. It's not going to show you all the details because you can't see the front of it. But this is what they look like, the ones we're going to be using on Tuesday. A little bit of glare. Not focusing very well. There it is. There, now it's focused. Yeah, they're pretty cool looking. The school's got lots of other lions as well, though. Lots of yellow and gold ones, mostly. And like orange. But yeah, 2 lions, drums, cymbals, a gong. It'll be good. It's going to be fun. It's not going to be a super, I don't think we're going to be there for a super long time, but just we're meeting up earlier in the day and then getting there, so we've got enough time to set up. Sharkies are driving past the set of Shogun. Interesting. I don't think I had heard about anything called Shogun filming here. I know there's a series that is maybe going to its 2nd season called Kung Fu. I don't know if it's probably connected in some way to the old school, 80s, that's just a guess, series. Lemonade. So yeah, last night for me was a little bit of Kung Fu practice, but mostly line dance practice. And then we are back out to Chilliwack again this weekend. We were out there last weekend as well, but we're going to visit Farmos's parents for a belated Mother's Day because her mother was actually in a play on Mother's Day, so we went to see the play, but we didn't really get to visit very much. And maybe tomorrow I'm gonna cook some pad thai. Gonna make an attempt at a vegan pad thai because apparently our friend has a vegan fish sauce substitute, which was the primary thing I was worried about, and then the most of the other ingredients can be replaced without too many problems. Do some tofu for everyone but Farmos, and then something else for Farmos, and then we've got an egg substitute to use as well. Sharkies say for Shogun could see some blue screen and rooftops that were Japanese according to your knowledge of the show. Alright. I mean, Shogun is, yeah, Japanese. So, Japanese equivalent of general or warlord, I guess. I think it's more like general. almost finished planting this year's plants. And yeah, we have been sort of continuing our discussions on wrapping up our time here in this house, because we're gonna sell and move, I guess probably, what, like northeast-ish? Eastish? Easterly? Sharky say, looks like a whole village was built behind Rocky Point Park. That's pretty cool. That would be fun to work on, something like that. That'd be a fun job. Still bummed out about our canceled trip to Japan, or further delayed, depending on how you want to look at it. Because we would, what? We'd still be in Japan if it had gone through, right? I think we would still be in Japan right now. We would have been there for like a week. I'm bumming myself out. Try not to think about that so much right now. But on the plus side, you know, I wouldn't be here right now reading a book to everybody. So why don't we do that? Why don't we talk about Wednesdays? So, Mr. Sharky didn't make it on Wednesday because he had a meeting to go to. Sharky say we're hearing about a lot of delayed travel plans. Yeah. Yeah, it's a bummer. There are some places that are open for travel right now. Pretty sure Korea is, South Korea. I think Italy is open, but I don't know how safe either of those really are for travel, but they're open. Oh, Mr. Sharky caught up. All right, cool. Well, I'll do my little recap anyways. The main part of the recap was, I mean, the main thing that happened was that Granny Weatherwax decided that she was basically going to cast a spell and time skip the entire kingdom of Lancre forward 15 years. Basically just, it's a little weird. It's kind of like the time would still pass, but nobody would notice. Like, I'm a little hazy on some of the details. Like, does everybody become 15 years older? Or is it just like they wake up the next day and it's 15 years later, but they're all the same, like they just skipped the 15 years? That's slightly unclear to me. Because I suppose, I don't know, like, Mr. Sharky got the Animaniacs reference. Fingerprints. I don't know. It's either way, I feel like they kind of glossed over an ethical discussion there, right? I feel like no matter how this spell works, it's kind of unethical. Kind of too severely unethical. Because, like, if it's just like everybody wakes up the next day and 15 years have passed but nobody's aged a day, that's, I think, the lesser of two evils, kind of, in that at least people haven't just missed out on 15 years of their lifespan, right? Um, but, you know, if any of them have relatives in Ankh-Morpork or anywhere else in the world, or really any concerns outside of the Kingdom of Lancre, then you're luck. You know, like, whoops, sorry. The rest of the world has had 15 extra years. And also, what happens to everybody that comes in to Lancre from the outside world over those 15 years, right? In 15 years, some travelers are going to come to Lancre, right? Like, somebody's going to wander across those borders. What happens to them? Like, is everybody just gone in between? And the other alternative, if they don't wake up, is that they just kind of doze through the next 15 years of their life. And I feel like that's way worse. Farmo says maybe they just come out the other side. Yeah, maybe. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe Lancre is just removed from the world for 15 years. All the fairy tale references. Yeah, no kidding. Mostly references to witches in other fairy tales, though there was the one fairy godmother reference, which kind of got glossed off as a witch. I mean, granted, you know, the witches themselves in this book have been godmothers at this point to the young heir, to young Tomjon, but not fairy godmothers, right? Witchy godmothers. And I mean, unless there's a version of Cinderella where the fairy godmother is just a witch, because, you know, I'm pretty much only familiar with the Disney version. I think I had a book once that had sort of the original story in it, but I don't remember that. Because I'm assuming that the Disney version is, you know, a take on an older fairy tale, Brothers Grimm or something like that. I gotta find that book. It might be at my parents' house. I had this old book that had a different, like, fairy tale story for every day of the year, and it was like a hefty book, and then most of them were just little, like a couple paragraphs for each day, or, you know, a paragraph in some cases maybe. But I think the first of each month had a fairy tale that was like a few pages long. And there were a lot of, you know, some of the older, they weren't as fully frightening as fairy tales can be, but there were some of them, like Matchstick Girl, that was sad, or The Dancing Shoes, which that one's just grim in, you know, the other sense of the word. And again, whether or not the Dancing Shoes one was maybe watered down a little bit, I don't know. Like slightly censored. I don't remember. But it was a really neat book. So I've got to find... yeah, I should find that. There's a few books from when I was a kid that I'd like to find and have another look at. I do every, like, few, I don't know, every few years I come across them and, you know, peruse. But, yeah. But yeah, so I think we were still mid-flight with, right, we left on a cliffhanger as Granny was attempting the second mid-air broom refueling. Magrat fell out of the sky and landed on the Fool. Um, yeah, and I honestly, I think. Oh, after attempting to. The fool was out in the woods attempting to return Grebo back to the witches in general. Sharkies are swapping devices. Quick, while the Sharkies are gone, say nice things about them. Ah, oh, Sharkies are such good people. I got nothing. I'm a little tired. I'm feeling better. I was really kind of feeling burnt out early in the week, and so I've been somewhat taking it easy this week for them, like somewhat, and that's good. I needed that. I think I maybe will have another bath tonight though. More relax. You ever like try to relax, try to take it easy, and then end up just doom scrolling on social media? That's what happened the last time I took a bath. It was like the bath itself was good, but I didn't fully relax because I just ended up, I don't know, doom scrolling. I need to try harder to not do that. Maybe try and get a little more sleep. Armo says the Sharkies are so nice. Good parents, I'm pretty sure. Oh boy. And you're home. Happy birthday, Elliot, by the way. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. There's a dog barking outside. And you smell like one, too. Bin has noticed the dog barking. He takes that as a compliment. Yeah, so why don't I continue reading? In my copy, I am on page 155. And where we ended off was Granny gritted her teeth. Well, let's have the power, she said. I'm running out of up. Amazing how. Granny's voice ended in a scream as, without any warning at all, her broomstick pinwheeled sharply across the clouds and dropped from sight. Not ideal. Alright. Continuing from there. Everybody ready? I hope so. The Fool and Magrat sat on a log on a small outcrop that looked out across the forest. The lights of Lancre town were, in fact, not very far away, but neither of them had suggested leaving. The air between them crackled with unspoken thoughts and wild surmisings. You've been a fool long? Said Magrat politely. She blushed in the darkness. In that atmosphere, it sounded the most impolite of questions. All my life, said the fool bitterly. I cut my teeth on a set of bells. I suppose it gets handed on from father to son, said Magrat. I never saw much of my father. He went off to be fool for the lords of Quirm when I was small, said the fool. Had a row with my granddad. He comes back from time to see my mom. That's terrible. There was a sad jingle as the fool shrugged. He vaguely recalled his father as a short, friendly little man with eyes like a couple of oysters. Doing something as brave as standing up to the old boy must have been quite outside his nature. The sound of 2 suits of bells, shaken in anger, still haunted his memory, which was full enough of bad scenes as it was. Oh boy, this fool's had a rough life, it seems like. A lot of trauma. Still, said Magrat, her voice higher than usual and with a vibrato of uncertainty, it must be a happy life. Making people laugh, I mean. When there was no reply, she turned to look at the man. His face was like stone. In a low voice, talking as though she was not there, the fool spoke. He spoke of the Guild of Fools and Joculators in Ankh-Morpork. Most visitors mistook it at first sight for the offices of the Guild of Assassins, which in fact was rather pleasant. The rather pleasant, airy collection of buildings next door. The assassins always had plenty of money. Sometimes the young fools, slaving at their rote in rooms that were always freezing, even in high summer, heard the young assassins at play over the wall and envied them, even though, of course, the number of piping voices grew noticeably fewer toward the end of them. I feel like that should be the end of term, but it just says the end of them. I feel like that should be the end of term, probably. The assassins also believed in competitive examination. In fact, all sorts of sounds managed to breach the high, grim, windowless walls, and from keen questioning of servants, the younger fools picked up a vision of the city beyond. There were taverns out there, and parks. There was a whole bustling world in which the students and apprentices of the various guilds and colleges took a full, ripe part, either by playing tricks on it, running through it shouting, or throwing parts of it up. Bleh. There was laughter which paid no attention to the 5 cadences or the 12 inflections. And, although the students debated this news in the dormitories at night, there was apparently unauthorized humor, delivered freestyle, with no reference to the Monster Fun Book, or the Council, or anyone. Sharky say, this section is delightfully Bildungsroman. I don't know what that means, I'm sorry. Out there, beyond the stained stonework, like some Charles Dickens novel, yeah. Excuse me. Out there, beyond the stained stonework, people were telling jokes without reference to the lords of misrule. It was a sobering thought. Well, not a sobering thought in actual fact, because alcohol wasn't allowed in the guild. But if it was, it would have been. There was nowhere more sober than the guild. The fool spoke bitterly of the huge, red-faced brother prankster, of evenings learning the merry jests, of long mornings in the freezing gymnasium, learning the 18 pratfalls and the accepted trajectory for a custard pie. and juggling. Juggling! Brother Jape, a man with a soul like a cold-boiled string, taught juggling. It wasn't that the fool was bad at juggling that reduced him to incoherent fury. Fools were expected to be bad at juggling, especially if juggling inherently funny items like custard pies, flaming torches, or extremely sharp cleavers. Those are so funny. What had Brother Jape laying about him in red-hot, clanging rage was the fact that the fool was bad at juggling because he wasn't any good at it. I can wrap my brain around that. Didn't you want to be anything else? Said Magrat. What else is there? Said the fool. I haven't seen anything else I could be. Student fools were allowed out in the last year of training, but under a fearsome set of restrictions. Capering miserably through the streets, he'd seen wizards for the first time, moving like dignified carnival floats. He'd seen the surviving assassins, foppish, giggling young men in black silk, as sharp as knives underneath. He'd seen priests, their fantastic costumes, only slightly marred by the long rubber sacrificial aprons they wore for major services. Rubber sacrificial aprons. Oh dear. Every trade and profession had its costume, he saw, and he realized for the first time that the uniform he was wearing had been carefully and meticulously designed for no other purpose than making its wearer look like a complete and utter pillock. Even so, he'd persevered. He'd spent his whole life persevering. He persevered precisely because he had absolutely no talent, and because grandfather would have flayed him alive if he didn't. He memorized the authorized jokes until his head rang, and got up even earlier in the morning to juggle until his elbows creaked. He had perfected his grasp of the comic vocabulary until only the very senior lords could understand him. He'd capered and clowned with an impenetrable grim determination, and he'd graduated top of his year and had been awarded the Bladder of Honor. He dropped it down the privy when he came home. Magrat was silent. The fool said, "How did you get to be a witch?" I mean, did you go to school or something?" "Oh, no. Goody Whemper just walked down to the village one day, got all us girls lined up, and chose me. You don't choose the craft, you see. It chooses you." "Yes, but when do you actually become a witch?" "When the other witches treat you as one, I suppose." Magrat sighed. "If they ever do," she added. "I thought they would after I did that spell in the corridor. It was pretty good, after all." "Marry, 'twas a rite of passage," said the fool, unable to stop himself. Because it was in the corridor, and it was a spell, so it was a rite of passage. That's the joke. Farmos got it. Sharky say English lit reference referring to the development of a character through their childhood. Oh, the Bildungsroman. I see. Sharky say, yuck, yuck, yuck. Rite of passage. Magrat gave him a blank look. He coughed. The other witches being those two old ladies, he said, relapsing into his usual gloom. Yes. Very strong characters, I imagine. Very, said Magrat with feeling. I wonder if they ever met my granddad, said the fool. Magrat looked at her feet. They're quite nice, really, she said. It's just that, well, when you're a witch, you don't think about other people. I mean, you think about them, but you don't actually think about their feelings, if you see what I mean. At least, not unless you think about it. She looked at her feet again. You're not like that, said the fool. Look, I wish you'd stop working for the Duke, said Magrat desperately. You know what he's like, torturing people and setting fire to their cottages and everything. But I'm his fool, said the fool. A fool has to be loyal to his master, right up until he dies. I'm afraid it's tradition. Tradition is very important. But you don't even like being a fool. I hate it. But that's got nothing to do with it. If I've got to be a fool, I'll do it properly. That's really stupid, said Magrat. Foolish, I'd prefer. The fool had been edging along the log. If I kiss you, he added carefully, do I turn into a frog? Magrat looked down at her feet again. They shuffled themselves under her dress, embarrassed at all this attention. She could sense the shades of Githa Og and Esme Weatherwax on either side of her. Granny's spectre glared at her. A witch is master of every situation, it said. Mistress, said the vision of Nanny Og, and made a brief gesture involving much grinning and waving of forearms. We shall have to see, she said. It was destined to be the most impressive kiss in the history of foreplay. That's a statement. Farmo says that's actually a pretty good line, though we shall have to see. Time, as Granny Weatherwax... Oh, I see. Oh, the one about the frog. I see where this is going. Time, as Granny Weatherwax had pointed out, is a subjective experience. The fool's years in the guild had been an eternity, whereas the hours with Magrat on the hilltop passed like a couple of minutes. And, high above Lancre, a double handful of seconds extended like taffy into hours of screaming terror. Ice! Screamed Granny. It's iced up! Nanny Og came alongside, trying vainly to match courses with the tumbling, bucking broomstick. Octarine fire crackled over the frozen bristles, shorting them out at random. For those who aren't as familiar with Discworld, octarine is the color of magic, and it is described as being a kind of greenish purple. Sharky say, don't worry, kids are in the other room. I'm not too concerned. I don't think things are going to get too inappropriate. She leaned over and snatched a handful of Granny's skirt. "I told you it was daft," she shouted. "You went through all that wet mist, and then up into the cold air, you daft besom! You let go of my skirt, Githa Og! Come on, grab a hold of mine! You're on fire at the back there!" They shot through the bottom of the cloud bank and screamed in unison as the shrub-covered ground emerged from nowhere and aimed itself directly at them. And went past. Nanny looked down a black perspective at the bottom of which a boil of white water was dimly visible. They had flown over the edge of Lancre Gorge. Blue smoke was pouring out of Granny's broomstick, but she hung on, determined, and forced it around. "What the hell are you doing?" roared Nanny. "I can follow the river," Granny Weatherwax screamed, above the crackle of flames. "Don't you worry." "You come aboard, do you hear? It's all over. You can't do it." There was a small explosion behind Granny, and several handfuls of burning bristles broke off and whirled away into the booming depths of the gorge. Her stick jerked sideways, and Nanny grabbed her around the shoulders as a gout of fire snapped another binding. The blazing broomstick shot from between her legs, twisted in the air, and went straight upward, trailing sparks and making a noise like a wet finger dragged around the top of a wine glass. This left Nanny flying upside down, supporting Granny Weatherwax at arm's length. They stared into one another's face and screamed. "I can't pull you up." "Well, I can't climb up, can I? Act your age, Githa." Nanny considered this. Then she let go. 3 marriages and an adventurous girlhood had left Nanny Og with thigh muscles that could crack coconuts. Oh dear. And the G-forces sucked at her as she forced the speeding stick down and around in a tight loop. Ahead of her, she made out Granny Weatherwax dropping like a stone, one hand clutching her hat, the other trying to prevent gravity from seeing up her skirts. Even plummeting. She urged the stick forward until it creaked, snatched the falling witch around the waist, fought the plunging stick back up to level flight, and sagged. The subsequent silence was broken by Granny Weatherwax saying, "Don't you ever do that again, Githa Og." "I promise." "Now turn us around. We're heading for Lancre Bridge, remember?" Nanny obediently turned the broomstick, brushing the canyon walls as she did so. "It's still miles to go," she said. "I mean to do it," said Granny. "There's plenty of night left." "Not enough, I'm thinking." "A witch doesn't know the meaning of the word failure, Githa." They shot up into the clear air again. The horizon was a line of golden light as the slow dawn of the disk sped across the land, bulldozing the suburbs of the night. I swear every time that Sir Terry ran into, describing light, he viewed it as a challenge. "It's me," said Nanny Og after a while. "What?" "It means lack of success." They flew in chilly silence for several seconds. I was speaking what's name? Figuratively, said Granny. Oh, well, you should have said. The line of light was bigger, brighter. For the first time, a flicker of doubt invaded Granny Weatherwax's mind, puzzled to find itself in such unfamiliar surroundings. I wonder how many cockerels there are in Lancre, she said quietly. Was that one of them moss name questions? I was just wondering. Nanny Og sat back. There were 32 of crowing age, she knew. She knew because she'd worked it out last night. Tonight. And had given Jason his instructions. She had 15 grown-up children and innumerable grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they'd had most of the evening to get into position. It should be enough. Did you hear that? Said Granny. Over Razorback way. Nanny looked innocently across the misty landscape. Sound traveled very clearly in these early hours. What? She said. Sort of an irk noise. No. Granny spun around. Over there. I definitely heard it this time. Something like cockadoo arr. Can't say I did, Esme, said Nanny, smiling at the sky. Like a bridge up ahead. And over there, right down there, it was a definite squawk. Dawn chorus, Esme, I expect. Look, only half a mile to go. Granny glared at the back of her colleague's head. There's something going on here, she said. Search me, Esme. Your shoulders are shaking. Lost my shawl back there. I'm a bit chilly. Look, we're nearly there. Sharky say that's a very specific sound. Granny glared ahead, her mind a maze of suspicions. She was going to get to the bottom of this, when she had time. The damp logs of Lancre's main link to the outside world drifted gently underneath them. From the chicken farm half a mile away came a chorus of strangled squawks and a thud. And that? What was that, then? Demanded Granny. Foul pest! Careful, I'm bringing us down. Are you laughing at me? Just pleased for you, Esme. You'll go down in history for this, you know. They drifted between the timbers of the bridge. Granny Weatherwax alighted cautiously on the greasy planking and adjusted her dress. Yes, well, she added nonchalantly. Better than Black Aliss, everyone will say, Nanny Og went on. Some people will say anything, said Granny. She peered over the parapet at the foaming torrent far below, and then up at the distant outcrop on which stood Lancre Castle. Do you think they will? She added nonchalantly. Mark my words. But you've got to complete the spell, mind. Granny Weatherwax nodded. She turned to face the dawn, raised her arms, and completed the spell. It is almost impossible to convey the sudden passage of 15 years and 2 months in words. It's a lot easier in pictures, when you can just use a calendar with lots of pages blowing off, or a clock with hands moving faster and faster until they blur, or trees bursting into blossom and fruiting in a matter of seconds. Well, you know. Or the sun becomes a fiery streak across the sky, and days and nights flicker past jerkily like a bad zoetrope, and the fashions visible in the clothes shop across the road whip on and off faster than a lunchtime stripper with 5 pubs to do. There's a simile I wasn't expecting. Oh, okay. Farmos, you're kind of spamming the chat. A very long Hank. 15 years worth of Hank. Excuse me. There are any amount of ways, but they won't be required because, in fact, none of this happened. The sun did jerk sideways a bit, and it seemed that the trees on the rimward side of the gorge were rather taller, and Nanny couldn't shake off the sensation that someone had just sat down heavily on her, squashed her flat, and then opened her out again. This was because the kingdom did not, in so many words, move through time in the normal flickering sky high-speed photography sense of the word. It moved around it, which is much cleaner, considerably easier to achieve, and saves all that traveling around trying to find a laboratory opposite a dress shop that will keep the same dummy in the window for 60 years, which has traditionally been the most time-consuming and expensive bit of the whole business. The kiss lasted more than 15 years. That's where that was going. That's why it was the most impressive kiss in the history of foreplay. The kiss lasted more than 15 years. Not even frogs can manage that. The fool drew back, his eyes glazed, his expression one of puzzlement. "Did you feel the world move?" he said. Magrat peered over his shoulder at the forest. "I think she's done it," she said. "Done what?" Magrat hesitated. "Oh, nothing. Nothing much, really." "Shall we have another try? I don't think we got it quite right that time." Magrat nodded. This time, it only lasted 15 seconds. It seemed longer. Sharky say 15 years of Hank sounds like one of those 2-week specials on a channel like Turner Classic Movies. Or it's just the most impressive failure to progress to second base. That's not how I would have put it. A tremor ran through the castle, shaking the breakfast tray from which the Duke Filmet, much to his relief, was eating porridge that wasn't too salty. It was felt by the ghosts that now filled Nannyog's cottage like a rugby team in a telephone box. It spread to every hen house in the kingdom, and a number of hands relaxed their grip. And 32 purple-faced cockerels took a deep breath and crowed like maniacs. But they were too late. Too late. "I still reckon you were up to something," said Granny Weatherwax. "Have another cup of tea," said Nanny pleasantly. "You won't go and put any drink in it, will you?" said Granny flatly. "It was the drink what did it last night. I would never have put myself forward like that. It's shameful." "Black Aliss never done anything like it," said Nanny encouragingly. "I mean, it was 100 years, all right, but it was only one castle she moved. I reckon anyone could do a castle." Granny's frown puckered at the edge. "And she let weeds grow over it. She let all weeds grow over it," she observed primly. "Right enough." "Very well done," said King Verence eagerly. "We all thought it was superb. Being in the ethereal plane, of course, we were in a position to observe closely." "Very good, your graciousness," said Nannyog. She turned and observed the crowding ghosts behind him, who hadn't been granted the privilege of sitting at, or partly through, the kitchen table. "But you lot can bugger off back to the outhouse," she said. "The cheek! Except the kiddies, they can stay," she added. "Poor little mites." "I am afraid it feels so good to be out of the castle," said the king. Granny Weatherwax yawned. "Anyway," she said, "we've got to find the boy now. That's the next step." "We shall look for him directly after lunch." "Lunch? It's chicken," said Nanny. "And you're tired. Besides, making a decent search will take a long time." "He'll be in Ankh-Morpork," said Granny. "Mark my words. Everyone ends up there. We'll start with Ankh-Morpork. You don't have to search for people when destiny is involved. You just wait for them in Ankh-Morpork." Nanny brightened up. "Our Karen got married to an innkeeper from there," she said. "I haven't seen the baby yet. We could get free board and everything." "We needn't actually go. The whole point is that he should come here. There's something about that city," said Granny. "It's like a drain." "It's 500 miles away," said Magrat. "You'll be away for ages." "I can't help it," said the fool. "The Duke's given me special instructions. He trusts me." "Huh. To hire more soldiers, I expect." "No, nothing like that. Not as bad as that." The fool hesitated. He'd introduced Felmet to the world of words. Surely that was better than hitting people with swords. Wouldn't that buy time? Wouldn't it be best for everybody in the circumstances? "But you don't have to go. You don't want to go." "That doesn't have much to do with it. I promised to be loyal to him." Yes, until you're dead. But you don't even believe that. You were telling me how much you hated the whole guild and everything." "Well, yes, but I still have to do it. I gave my word." Magrat came close to stamping her foot, but didn't sink so low. "Just when we were getting to know one another," she shouted. "You're pathetic." The fool's eyes narrowed.
I'd only be pathetic if I broke my word, he said. But I may be incredibly ill-advised. I'm sorry. I'll be back in a few weeks anyway. Don't you understand I'm asking you not to listen to him? I said I'm sorry. I couldn't see you again before I go, could I? I shall be washing my hair, said Magrat stiffly. When? Whenever.
They had a fight.
Well pinched the bridge of his nose and squinted wearily at the wax-spattered paper.
The play wasn't going well at all.
He'd sorted out the falling chandelier and found a place for a villain who wore a mask to conceal his disfigurement, and he'd rewritten one of the funny bits to allow for the fact that the hero had been born in a handbag. It was the clowns who were giving him trouble again. They kept changing every time he thought about them. He preferred them in twos, that was traditional, but now there seemed to be a third one, and he was blowed if he could think of any funny lines for him. His quill moved scratchily over the latest sheet of paper, trying to catch the voices that had streamed through his dreaming mind and had seemed so funny at the time. His tongue began to stick out the corner of his mouth. He was sweating. This is my little study, he wrote. Hey, with a little study, you could go a long way.
For those who aren't looking at the physical copy, this is all in italics, and there are a lot of extra vowels. And some extra consonants, too.
And I wish you would start now. If you can't leave in, that's Y-N, a cab, then leave in a huff. If that's too soon, then leave in a minute and a huff. Say, have you got a pencil? A crayon? Quell stared at this in horror. On the page it looked nonsensical, ridiculous. And yet, in the thronged auditorium of his mind, he dipped the quill in the ink pot and chased the echoes further. Second clown. At's a right, boss. Third clown. Business with bladder on stick. Honk, honk. Quell gave up. Yes, it was funny. He knew it was funny. He'd heard the laughter in his dreams. But it wasn't right. Not yet. Maybe never. It was like the other idea about the two clowns, one fat, one thin. This is a main dainty mess you have got me into, Stanley.
That's got to be a reference to something.
He had laughed until his chest ached, and the rest of the company had looked at him in astonishment. But in his dreams it was hilarious. He laid down the pen and rubbed his eyes. It must be nearly midnight, and the habit of a lifetime told him to spare the candles, although, for a fact, they could afford all the candles they could eat now, whatever Vittler might say.
Farmo says, okay, let's see. First, Sharky say he went from referencing Phantom of the Opera to the importance of being earnest. This book is loving literary references. Farmo says, first one, Three Stooges. Second one, Second Set of Men, Abbott and Costello. Sharkies think the three clowns might actually be the Marx Brothers. Stanley? Stanley is Abbott and Costello? I say it like that because it's spelled Stanleigh. Stanley. Excuse me. Hour gongs were being struck all across the city, and night watchmen were proclaiming that it was indeed midnight, and also that, in the face of all the evidence, all was well. Think this was written before the first Guard's book? I think we've gone backwards a little bit. Many of them got as far as the end of the sentence, before being mugged. Well pushed open the shutters and looked out at Ankh-Morpork. It would be tempting to say the Twin City was at its best this time of year, but that wouldn't be entirely correct. It was at its most typical. The River Ankh, the cloaca of half a continent, was already pretty wide and silt-laden when it reached the city's outskirts. By the time it left, it didn't so much flow as exude. Owing to the accretion of the mud of centuries, the bed of the river was in fact higher than some of the low-lying areas, and now, with the snow melt swelling the flow, many of the low-rent districts on the Morpork side were flooded, if you can use that word for a liquid you could pick up in a net. This sort of thing happened every year, and would have caused havoc with the drains and sewage systems, so it is just as well that the city didn't have very many. Its inhabitants merely kept a punt handy in the backyard and, periodically, built another story on the house. It was reckoned to be very healthy there. Very few germs were able to survive. Quell looked across a sort of misty sea in which buildings clustered like a sandcastle competition at high tide. Flares and lighted windows made pleasing patterns on the iridescent surface, but there was one glare of light, much closer to hand, which particularly occupied his attention. On a patch of slightly higher ground by the river, bought by Vitoler for a ruinous sum, a new building was rising. It was growing even by night, like a mushroom. Quell could see the cressets burning all along the scaffolding as the hired craftsmen, and even some of the players themselves, refused to let the mere shade of the sky interrupt their labors. New buildings were rare in Morpork, but this was even a new type of building. The Disc, spelt with a Y. Of course it's called the Disc. Couldn't be called the Globe, now could it? The Disc. Vitoler had been aghast at the idea at first, but young Tomjon had kept at him, and everyone knew that once the lad had got the feel of it, he could persuade water to flow uphill. "But we've always moved around, laddie," said Vitoler, in the desperate voice of one who knows that, at the end of it all, he's going to lose the argument. "I can't go around settling down at my time of life." "It's not doing you any good," said Tomjon firmly.
All these cold nights and frosty mornings. You're not getting any younger. We should stay put somewhere and let people come to us. And they will, too. You know the crowds we're getting now. Whell's plays are famous. It's not my plays, Whell had said. It's the players. I can't see me sitting by a fire in a stuffy room and sleeping on feather beds and all that nonsense, said Vittoler, but he'd seen the look on his wife's face and had given in. And then there had been the theatre itself. Making water run uphill was a parlor trick compared to getting the cash out of Vittoler, but it was a fact. They had been doing well these days. Ever since Tomjon had been big enough to wear a ruff and say 2 words without his voice cracking. Whell and Vittoler had watched the first few beams of the wooden framework go up. It's against nature, Vittoler had complained, leaning on his stick. Capturing the spirit of the theatre, putting it in a cage. It'll kill it. Oh, I don't know, said Whell diffidently. Tomjon had laid his plans well. He'd devoted an entire evening to Whell before even broaching the subject to his father, and now the dwarf's mind was on fire with the possibilities of backdrops and scenery changes, and wings and flies and magnificent engines that could lower gods from the heavens, and trapdoors that could raise demons from hell. Whell was no more capable of objecting to the new theatre than a monkey was of resenting a banana plantation. Damn thing hasn't even got a name, Vittoler had said. I should call it the gold mine, because that's what it's costing me. Where's the money going to come from? That's what I'd like to know. In fact, they'd tried a lot of names, none of which suited Tomjon. It's got to be a name that means everything, he said, because there's everything inside it. The whole world on the stage, do you see? And Whell had said, knowing as he said it that what he was saying was exactly right, the disc. And now the disc was nearly done, and still he hadn't written the new play. He shut the window and wandered back to his desk, picked up the quill, and pulled another sheet of paper toward him. A thought struck him. The whole world was a stage to the gods. Presently he began to write. All the disc, it is but an theatre, he wrote, and all men and women are but players. He made the mistake of pausing, and another inspiration sleeted down, sending his train of thought off along an entirely new track. He looked at what he had written and added, except those who sell popcorn.
Turkeys, though we currently see the word written disc, your head tilt was a strong indication of the alternate spelling. I didn't even know I did it. After a while, he crossed this out and tried, like unto the stage of a theatre is the world, whereon all persons strut as players. This seemed a bit better. He thought for a bit, and continued conscientiously, sometimes they walk on, sometimes they walk off.
He seemed to be losing it. Time. What he needed was an infinity. There was a muffled cry and a thump from the next room. Quell dropped the quill and pushed open the door cautiously. The boy was sitting up in bed, white-faced. He relaxed when Quell came in. "Quell!" "What's up, lad? Nightmares?" "Gods! It was terrible! I saw them again. I really thought for a minute that—" Quell, who was absent-mindedly picking up the clothes that Tomjon had strewn around the room, paused in his work. He was keen on dreams. That was when the ideas came. "That what?" he said. "It was like... I mean, I was sort of inside something. Like a bowl. And there were these 3 terrible faces peering in at me." "Aye?" "Yes. And then they all said, 'All hail!' And then they started arguing about my name, and then they said, 'Anyway, who shall be king hereafter?' And then one of them said, 'Hereafter what?' And then the other 2 said, 'Just hereafter, girl. It's what you're supposed to say in these circumstances. You might try and make an effort.' And then they all peered closer, and one of the others said, 'He looks a bit peaky. I reckon it's all that foreign food.' And then the youngest one said, 'Nanny, I've told you already, there's no such place as Thespia.' And then they bickered a bit, and one of the old ones said, 'He can't hear us, can he? He's tossing and turning a bit.' And the other one said, 'You know, I've never been able to get sound on this thing, Esme.' And then they bickered some more, and it went cloudy, and then I woke up," he finished lamely. "It was horrible, because every time they came close to the bowl, it sort of magnified everything, so all you could see was eyes and nostrils." Quell hoisted himself onto the edge of the narrow bed. "Funny old thing, dreams," he said. "Not much funny about that one." "No, but, I mean, last night I had this dream about a little bandy-legged man walking down a road," said Quell. "He had a little black hat on, and he was walking as though his boots were full of water." Tomjon nodded politely. "Yes," he said. "And?" "Well, that was it. And nothing. He had this little cane which he twirled, and, you know, it was incredibly—" The dwarf's voice trailed off. Tomjon's face had that familiar expression of polite and slightly condescending puzzlement that Quell had come to know and dread. "Anyway, it was very amusing," he said, half to himself. But he knew he'd never convince the rest of the company. If it didn't have a custard pie in it somewhere, they said, it wasn't funny. Tomjon swung his legs out of bed and reached for his breeches. "I'm not going back to sleep," he said. "What's the time?" "Sirens." "It's after midnight," said Quell. "And you know what your father said about going to bed late." "I'm not," said Tomjon, pulling on his boots. "I'm getting up early. Getting up early is very healthy. And now I'm going out for a very healthy drink. You can come too," he added, "to keep an eye on me." Quell gave him a doubting look. "You also know what your father says about going out drinking," he said. "Yes. He said he used to do it all the time when he was a lad. He said he'd think nothing of quaffing ale all night and coming home at 5 a.m., smashing windows. He said he was a bit of a roister-doister, not like these white-livered people today who can't hold their drink." Tomjon adjusted his doublet in front of the mirror and added, "You know, Hwel, I reckon responsible behavior is something to get when you grow older. Like varicose veins." Hwel sighed. Tomjon's memory for ill-judged remarks was legendary. "All right," he said. "Just the one, though. Somewhere decent." "I promise." Tomjon adjusted his hat. It had a feather in it. "By the way," he said, "how exactly does one quaff?" "I think it means you spill most of it," said Hwel. Well, it's 8:30 and we've reached a scene break. The next scene is a few pages. I am a little sleepy. Oh, we got a lot of footnotes coming up. Spoiler warning. I'm bad with spoiler warnings. I frequently say them after the thing that I've said. Yeah, the next scene, if I'm not missing a break, is like 9 more pages, maybe 10. So I think I'm going to call it a slightly early Friday night, if that's okay with everybody. Oh. Stretch! We're definitely having some plot advancement taking place here. A lot of, Sharkies are rather tired. Yeah. Yeah, that's understandable. It is staying light out later and later. It is 8:32 and I can see the sunlight in the sky still. I don't even have the lights on right now in here. Oh, as Farmos is saying, it's light enough. I didn't need the lights on. Yep. So yeah, it'll be another busy weekend for us. Maybe we'll have a relaxed Monday though. And then I've got that lion dance on Tuesday. And then we'll be back here on Wednesday. Sharky say, "I did a lot today, including using a weed whacker for the first time ever. It was both exhilarating and terrifying." Nice, nice. Hopefully you came out mostly unscathed. Well, happy birthday again to Elliot. And yeah, hope everyone enjoyed tonight's reading. And I will catch y'all, all y'all. Sharky saying Mr. was tired enough today to speak to the kids like John Wayne and then started into a knobby accent. Nice. Oh boy. Alright. I'll see y'all, all y'all, next Wednesday. Hopefully you can relax a little yourselves over the weekend. Alright. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Good night.